As I said in the previous lecture, we are going to rebuild the Raspberry Pi full stack application from scratch in its original edition version, and then we'll upgrade it. So that means that on the Raspberry Pi side, we'll start with a blank installation of the Raspberry Pi operating system, the Raspberry Pi OS, and then we are going to work with that. The easiest way to install the Raspberry Pi operating system on an SD card for your Raspberry Pi is to use the Raspberry Pi Imager, which is a very simple to use utility that you can download from the Raspberry Pi website. So go to raspberrypi.org, then under Computers, go to Software, and here you'll see the Raspberry Pi Imager download buttons for your operating system. So download the one that matches your operating system. I'm getting the Mac OS version, and I've got it right here already running. Just going to put this window away. All right, so there's the Raspberry Pi Imager ready to go. Insert the SD card in your computer's SD card reader and writer. And once ready, go back to the Raspberry Pi Imager and click on the operating system button to bring up your options. As you can see, there's lots of options here that you can use. The default one is a 32-bit version of the Raspberry Pi OS, which contains the Raspberry Pi desktop. It's marked as recommended, but that's not the one that we are going to use. Instead, just go to Raspberry Pi OS Other. And then in here, you'll see again Raspberry Pi OS Lite 32-bit, which is the Raspberry Pi OS. It's a port, but with no desktop environment. This is the one that we are going to use. There's other options if you're curious. There's the recommended 32-bit version of the Raspberry Pi OS with the desktop environment and the recommended applications. And then there's 64 bits and the legacy operating systems down the bottom. So for the purposes of our course and for the full stack application, I'm going to choose the 32-bit version of Raspberry Pi OS without the desktop environment. That's going to give me a operating system footprint that's just 0.3 gigabytes. We don't need any of the desktop components, which would just bloat the operating system image and would be quite useless for our purposes. So I'm going to go for this one, click to select it. Next one is storage. So here is my SD card, 32 gigabyte SD card, and I'll select that. And before you click on write, let's go into the settings options. So yes, select yes, and I need to authenticate. So what the advanced options window allows you to do is to set things such as the host name of your Raspberry Pi, enable SSH access with password or with a SSH key, set the username and the password. We're going to do all that. Another nice thing is that it copies the Wi-Fi settings from your host computer, so you don't have to go out looking for passwords or SSIDs. The tool itself will get that information from your computer and set it up here so that that information is essentially burned or saved into the SD card with the operating system in it. And there's a few other settings down the bottom, which are not as important. So let's go back to the beginning. For the host name, I'm going to set mine to RPI02WB. I'm typing here a B because I already have another Raspberry Pi in my network with this name without the B. So I just want to differentiate. I'm going to write this name down. So this is now the host name of your new Raspberry Pi, RPIZ2WB.local. I'm going to enable SSH. You can use public key authentication if you want, but I'll keep things simple. Just going to use username and password, and I'm going to use the standard password Raspberry. Never forget that I'm going to type it one more time. All right, so there's my username and password. I am letting the tool to configure my wireless LAN. That's my SSID and the password copied from my host computer. Under set locale settings, I'm not going to click on this button because I don't want to set the time on my Raspberry Pi to my local time. Instead, I prefer that it keeps time in UTC, Coordinated Universal Time, which is better for server-side systems. And remember that the full stack application has the ability to detect your local time based on the browser, information provided by the browser, and then convert UTC time, the time for various entries into the full stack application database, into your local time. So there's no need to actually keep local time on the Raspberry Pi itself. So as I said, I'm going to leave this setting unchecked, and my Raspberry Pi is going to keep time in UTC, Coordinated Universal Time. And the rest don't really matter. I'm going to play a sound when it's finished and eject the media when finished. And click on save. And finally, write the operating system onto the SD card. So authenticate once again. And give it a bit of time. Come back in 5 or 10 minutes and continue then. And we're back, and the new SD card with the Raspberry Pi OS on it is ready. So click on continue. You can then remove the SD card from your drive, from your computer, since it's already ejected. And let's continue in the next lecture where we'll do the boot up for the first time and then the configuration of the OS.